I'm Carsten Belanich. I'm the newly appointed chair of the Washington Policy Center Young Professionals Advisory Board. It's really fun to be here. I was asked a few weeks ago by WPC staff about what we'd like to do for our first podcast for 2019, and I think with everything that's going on in transportation in Washington State, especially here in Seattle, with the viaduct or the viadume or any number of names we have for the closing of Washington 99 in downtown Seattle, it's put transportation and traffic kind of the front of our minds. So we thought it would be great to kick off 2019 by talking about transportation. I'm here with Washington Policy Center's Center for Transportation Director Mariya Frost. Hi, Mariya.
Hello.
And we'll be going through a couple of questions. This is the first podcast of 2019, and we're really excited. And let's get right into it.
All right.
The first thing, Mariya, I understand that you participated in a pilot program for the road usage charge.
Mm-hmm.
What is the road usage charge, and what is Washington State trying to accomplish with this?
Sure. The road usage charge is a 2.4 cent flat rate that drivers would pay for every mile that they drive, as opposed to paying at the pump in fuel tax. In Washington State, we pay 49.4 cents per gallon to the state in fuel tax, and we pay 18.4 cents in federal fuel tax. Combined, that brings us to having the third highest gas tax in the nation. The 2.4 cent per mile rate can be collected in a number of different ways. Three of the most well-known, I would say, include the mileage permit, where you prepay for the number of miles that you wish to drive. That would include miles driven out of state. There's the odometer reading, where you would snap a picture of your odometer and submit that. And again, that includes miles driven out of state. Both of those are the lower tech, less invasive options for collecting your mileage information, and both would charge you more than this other option, which entails you putting a GPS transponder in your car. And what that would do, and this is what I tried for my first 6 months of the project, is it tracks not only how many miles you drive, but when and where you drive them, just like any other GPS device would do. And when I tested this out, I was really shocked to find out that this app that I was using, DriveSync, not only was collecting my mileage information, but it was actually grading me on how I drive. So I was getting a grade out of 100 points based on my speeding, braking, accelerating, and cornering, whatever that is. And that was really interesting to me and very shocking. So that's what the road usage charge is as far as what it intends to, or what public officials intend to accomplish. That's where the debate gets interesting, and that's where I differentiate between the pilot project that I've just described, where we've got an isolated experiment, right, with a flat rate, no politics involved, and then what this would look like once it goes through the legislative process, and all of the interest groups want a piece of this pie, a piece of this revenue pie. And so what public officials are trying to accomplish, they say, is to replace the gas tax, which I think is still very viable. What I believe that they actually want to accomplish is to get around the 18th Amendment of the Washington State Constitution. The 18th Amendment protects fuel tax revenue for highway purposes only, and it's extremely inconvenient to public officials who want to have the power and discretion to spend our money the way that they see fit. And right now, the trend in Washington is to spend as much money as possible on public transportation and bike and pedestrian projects, anything other than highways, and anything other than projects that will encourage people to drive more. So this is what I think is kind of the big overview for what this is intended to be in the long run. The last thing I'll say is, there is, of course, evidence for this claim. The Puget Sound Regional Council is our local metropolitan planning organization, and they have laid out a plan for 2040 and have said they would like to see 2/3 of revenue come from a road usage charge, and they would like that revenue to be flexible so that they can spend 53% of funds on transit and 17% on highways.
So just so I understand that correctly, the third option that you're talking about is a GPS transponder in your car that would be installed in every car in Washington State.
Well, right, and so what they're saying is you would have an option, right? They're offering you choices. I don't think those are real choices because some people are going to want to choose to not participate at all.
Yeah.
In Oregon is the only state right now that has a functional road usage charge in place that's been tested and that's running right now. It is totally voluntary.
Okay.
So I don't believe it would be constitutional to force you to install a transponder in your car. I think there would be constitutional issues with that, particularly with the Fourth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. You have to waive your right to privacy. I don't think you can be coerced to waive your right to privacy. But if you don't choose a GPS transponder, then you are agreeing to pay above and beyond the miles that you drive on Washington state roads. So that's the trade-off, right? And it doesn't feel like a fair trade-off to me.
You either give up your right to privacy, or you can pay
or you
more.
can pay up.
Yeah. Are there any conditions under which a road usage charge might be acceptable as policy or be good policy for Washington State?
So at Washington Policy Center, we do support direct user fees, right? And a gas tax in many ways is a direct user fee because it's protected by the 18th Amendment. So drivers pay at the pump, and then that money is reinvested back into making our roads better, right? That's the idea. Of course, I say it's mostly a user fee because there has been some diversion to other things. But for the most part, it is a user fee. So a road usage charge, a true user fee, would, that where you pay for every mile that you drive, would have to be first and foremost protected by the 18th Amendment, so that the money is used to pay for the roads that drivers are depending on. This is what they're paying money for, not on transit, not on other projects that have no direct benefit to the driver, to the payee. Additionally, public officials will have to figure out a way to deal with administrative costs for a road usage charge. A gas tax is super cheap and super easy to collect at less than 1% of administrative costs. A road usage charge is anywhere from 5 to 13%. So to make up for what is being spent on administration, they would probably have to ratchet up the flat fee of 2.4 cents per mile. Another big deal that we would have to work through is privacy, right? I mean, people have the right to move about their lives, go to work, pick up their children, go to church, participate in extracurricular activities without government breathing down their neck and forcing them to report how much they've driven and where. And so I think that is going to be the biggest and most difficult obstacle to overcome. I think I get the impression from the more recent generation that people are willing to make that trade-off, right? I mean, we make that trade-off all the time with things like Facebook, right, where we relinquish our privacy to get the benefit of staying in touch with our friends and people far away. But Facebook, our cell phones, all these different tools at our disposal, these are personal tools that we get to choose, that we can choose to turn off, that we can choose to not participate in, that are not attached to taxation. I don't think that they're really a fair comparison to a road usage charge. So that trade-off, I make that point only to say that it's a trade-off, and some people are willing to make it, and some are not because it is a government-run program. And lastly, The other condition that would have to be met is for public officials to really look at the cost of transportation projects and make a diligent effort to reduce those costs. Some of those costs are outside of their control, but some of them are within their control. And so I think the public will find public officials more credible when they come to ask them for more money if public officials have already done what they can to reduce taxes and reduce the burden as much as possible elsewhere. And I say all of those things, I mean, recognizing that it's probably wishful thinking in Washington State. And so I think it's because of that that we don't support a road usage charge in its current form, and why I don't think that a road usage charge as a policy would be a direct user fee or something we could support or get behind. It would be a mileage tax, and that's what we've been calling it.
Well, speaking of wishful thinking, let's move on and talk a little bit about sound transit legislation, kind of the upcoming year in the Washington legislature. Maybe first, it'd be helpful just to, if you give a little bit of introduction to the car tab overcharge issue and the lawsuit that's going on behind that. And then we could go on to talk about what legislation is being proposed during this session, if there's any at all, to address those overcharges by Sound Transit.
Right. So we had an election in 2016 on Sound Transit 3, which is the third of Sound Transit's rail expansion efforts. And it passed in every county except for Pierce County. And taxpayers started receiving their car tab renewals in 2017. I should rewind a little bit. Sound Transit 3 is a combination of three taxes, a sales tax, property tax, and car tab tax. And the public was told that the car tab tax would be 0.8%, and so $80 of a $10,000 value vehicle. What Sound Transit didn't tell the public was that they value vehicles at MSRP rather than fair market values. And the reason that they do that is, yes, the depreciation schedule that they use is in state law, but it's also repealed, and it's a schedule that Sound Transit chose to use and made sure that they were able to use so that they could collect maximum tax revenue from the public. So in 2017, taxpayers started to receive their car tab renewals, and they were really shocked to find out that the tax that had been imposed was a lot bigger than what they were expecting it to be. And so that's how this whole car tab fiasco started. And because Sound Transit refused to do anything about it, and they still to this day could fix this tomorrow, legislators who are directly elected and to their positions and are accountable to their constituents stepped in and decided to try to pass legislation that would make taxpayers whole, so to speak. And so that has been going on for 2 years. 2017 legislative session, 2018, and now 2019. And so there are a series of bills that have been filed that intend to deal with the car tab problem and unfair tax overcharges that people continue to get year after year. And there's also bills that deal with reforming the Sound Transit Board and having that board be a directly elected rather than an appointed and insulated board. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, and I understand there's also a lawsuit going on regarding the overcharges. Where do we stand with that?
Yeah, so there was a lawsuit filed. It's actually a class action lawsuit filed in June of 2018. And it was the first court hearing took place in September, and the case was basically thrown out by the judge, who said that it was above her pay grade. She didn't really go into the merits of what was being presented. What was being presented by someone named Joel Ard, who's the lead attorney on the case, is that the statute and law that authorized Sound Transit to collect an additional 0.8% car tab increase was drafted unconstitutionally. And drafting it unconstitutionally is what allowed Sound Transit to sneak by with a car tab tax that's attached to an old, outdated, repealed depreciation schedule. So that's why I think they were intentionally obscure in how they drafted that legislation. So the lawsuit is different than the bills because while the bills try to create a credit program to get people their money back, or the lawsuit really goes into the root of the problem, which is this unconstitutionally drafted statute. If they win, and the judge agrees that this was in fact unconstitutional, Sound Transit would have to refund all of the money that has been collected from this additional tax. So that's what's going on with the lawsuit. And then there's also an initiative
That's right.
that has been approved by the Secretary of State. It's Initiative 976 by Tim Eyman, and it would repeal all car tab taxes, leaving a single state $30 car tab fee.
Okay. And that would be on the ballot this November 2019.
If legislators choose to do nothing with it, which I anticipate is what will happen, yes, it would be on the ballot in November.
Okay.
And if it passes in the ballot in November, I imagine it'll be challenged like it was in the past.
Absolutely. So moving on to the topic that, I when I came down from my office in Eastlake to down here to Soto, of course you can't stop thinking about the viaduct or the end of the viaduct that we've been anticipating kind of my whole life, really, growing up in Seattle. But what's going on right now with the closure of the viaduct? How has it objectively impacted traffic over the past 10 days now? Have you observed anything? Is there any data on it? And it'd be interesting to hear you.
Sure. So what I will begin with is to say that traffic congestion is very much here to stay, right? The new tunnel is 30% more narrow than the original viaduct, right? And so it is a smaller space. Right now, obviously it's closed, but when it opens, it will be free to travel through the tunnel for a period of time, and then we're expecting it to be tolled as early as September of summer of 2019. And the tolls will range anywhere from $1 to $2.25. So what's really interesting about all this is right now, Washington State Department of Transportation, this was recently in the news, is using $4.4 million taxpayer dollars to advertise the tunnel. I don't know if you saw.
Yeah, I've seen the billboards and
yes. Yes. And so, their goal is to inform people of how the new tunnel works, but then also it seems like a marketing effort to tell people, look what we've accomplished. The tunnel is finished. And then if you go to the website, the 99 Tunnel website, there's going to be a party on February 20th. It reminds me so much of the party that Sound Transit officials threw for themselves on Capitol Hill. Yeah. Right. And they're saying that, they're hoping to inform people on how to use this tunnel and all of that. And at the end of the day, people are going to open up Google Maps or Waze and take the trip that is shortest and fastest and cheapest. And so we've got an additional $4 million being wasted right now on marketing this new tunnel. And ironically, this summer, DOT is going to be sending the exact opposite message by tolling people out of the tunnel. So that's what's been in the news more recently.
I don't know if this is a fair criticism or something, but looking at those same billboards, when a project date just says early February, if someone told me that at work and I said, oh, the project will be done in early February, but didn't give me an exact date, I'd be very, very scared. I don't know if that's a specific project, but
right. Yeah, I think public officials really like to have that flexibility.
It's nice, isn't it? Yeah.
On public projects.
Yeah. So the mayor has also proposed tolls or fees for downtown city streets to deal with the diversionary traffic. What's the story behind that, and what are your thoughts on it, Mariya?
Sure. So those are called cordon tolls, and they have been done in other cities in Europe. Of course, Seattle's not Europe, and we shouldn't try to be like other European cities. We have our own unique communities here in Washington State, our own unique culture and way of life. And so I always remind people that we do not need to be like Europe. We're not like Europe. We don't have the density of Europe.
Yeah.
And so if the mayor is successful in getting these tolls on city streets so that people have no option but to pay a toll, whether it be in the tunnel or in downtown, Seattle would be the first city in the United States to impose this kind of a toll. I obviously think it's a terrible idea, and I think it has an unfair and disproportionate impact on people who cannot afford to live in Seattle but have to commute every day to work to get there. So, you know, and I've heard the Seattle Department of Transportation at an event say that, you know, people are just going to have to get used to this new way of doing things, and really paying for the luxury of accessing the urban core, which is nonsense, because what she's saying is we need to pay for the luxury of accessing our jobs. It's not just the core. I mean, that's gov speak.
Yeah.
As far as I'm concerned, we are just trying to get to work and you know, pay our bills and get home for dinner and take care of our kids. And so I think the proposed tolls in downtown reflect a local government that is really out of touch with the people who are trying to do business in the city. And it's very unattractive, it's unpopular, and I think a generally bad idea. And I think there was a piece recently in the Seattle Times. They did a poll, an Elway poll, on what people think of the tolls, and more than half, I'm pretty sure, do not support tolls and feel that they're punitive.
Yeah.
And still, of course, we know that Seattle's going to move forward regardless of what people say. Yeah. I don't even know why they ask for public opinion half the time.
It's the people who already own homes in the downtown core in Seattle who have access to bus routes, who can ride their bike or walk into core, telling people who commute into Seattle that they need to pay for the privilege. There's an irony there. Right,
but the rest of us, are we supposed to wait 25 years for light rail to reach Tacoma?
Exactly.
And even then, it's light capacity rail. It's not going to carry the volume of people who are trying to travel.
And as you mentioned, with our density and kind of the distance between stops, it probably never will.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right.
So, you know, we've talked about these issues. You've gone through the road usage charge, sound transit and overcharges, and the Alaskan Way Viaduct, including talking about, you know, potential tolls in downtown Seattle. So we talked about, it doesn't sound like the most positive picture right now. You know, this is a podcast for young professionals and people who aspire to be leaders in our region. What's something that we can do right now to make a difference in Washington transportation issues, or, you know, is there one thing that we could attack specifically?
Yeah, I think, and I hope this doesn't sound cliche, but I really believe that people who believe in the free market, who want to protect individual liberty and our freedom of mobility, need to stay involved. As tempting as it is to just want to get up and leave with the way things are going, stay involved, stay engaged, particularly on not, and I'm not just talking about the state legislature, I'm talking about your city council. Yep. They have a huge impact on local decisions. And so I think that is a noble and valid effort. And, you know, maybe it's wishful thinking on my part, but I do believe the pendulum swings back and forth, and people do get tired once they see how these policies are worsening our quality of life. At least that's my hope. Yeah. That people will open their eyes to the importance of protecting our personal liberties and our freedom to choose how we live and travel and work. So I would push people to get involved in their city councils, not only to testify, but to run and make sure that their voice is heard, and that there is an actual diversity of thought in these public forums. Yeah. I think there is value to that.
And kind of a pretty broad question. We tend to think of transportation, these are big, capital-intensive, long-term projects that look like natural monopolies. So it's not something it's not something that you always think of as being able to apply free market values to transportation. How can free market ideas help solve problems in transportation? It's something that you work on every day.
Well, I think they are already solving problems, right? We see things like Uber and Lyft increasing people's mobility, in some cases to the detriment of public transit, but that's because people are choosing the most efficient mode for them. And if transit wants their service, they should compete rather than coerce for additional ridership. We're also seeing that with autonomous, connected, electric, and shared vehicles. This is all new technology that isn't, years and years away. It's happening right now, and it's very exciting, the developments that are being made on that front, particularly with freight and platooning freight and all the different ways that we can maximize the road capacity that we already have. I think those are very exciting developments. Other transportation problems, for example, some of the reasons that traffic congestion gets significantly worse are accidents. Autonomous vehicle technology can significantly reduce accidents by informing people on the road whose vehicles are connected. If there's ice on the road or debris or what have you, telling other cars behind them, so that we can prevent those accidents before they happen and cripple our road for like 4 hours during peak commute. So this is new technology that is being developed to solve everyday problems. And it's very, very exciting. And I'm very hopeful that the free market will prevail, because people at the end of the day are going to do what they believe is best. They're going to make decisions based on what is most affordable, what makes the most sense for them, not because of, a government subsidy or program telling them to make those choices.
Is it possible that driverless cars and autonomous vehicles of any kind would, by the time that Sound Transit reaches Bellevue or Tacoma, that it's irrelevant anyway? Is that something we should be thinking about when we talk about these huge capital-intensive transportation projects?
Yes. Yeah, Brian Mistely, who's the CEO of INRIX, which is a traffic data company out of Kirkland, said it really, really well, that light rail will be obsolete by the time that it arrives, because of how fast new technology is coming onto the market, and how excited people are to adopt it. Of course, there's, when we talk about autonomous vehicles, of course, there's issues of, questions around safety and liability, and all of those things do need to be worked out before the vehicles are allowed on our public roads.
Well, Mariya, this has been super interesting. I think we have a tradition of ending with a fun fact of the day. Do you have a transportation-related fun fact by any chance?
Yeah, I don't know if it's fun, but it's a fact. There was an article I read recently in which it was another article about how Uber and Lyft are ruining transit. And when Uber and Lyft enter a city, rail ridership decreases 1.29% per year, and bus ridership by 1.7% per year. I believe in San Francisco, Lyft and Uber have caused a 12.7% decline in transit ridership. So I'm not saying that as something to celebrate or not celebrate. It's just a fact and an observation of how people choose to travel. And there's something really attractive in these modes that gets them from where they are to where they want to be, not, from station to station, and then they have to walk and do whatever. This is a reliable, accessible, affordable form of travel that becomes increasingly more affordable if you carpool and add more people to that vehicle. So I thought that was really interesting.
That is really interesting. And it's maybe that BART in the Bay Area or Sound Transit here have to think hard about the value that they provide to citizens whose tax dollars that they use to build their own infrastructure.
Well, and a lot of the policy recommendations that are coming out of cities that are, really insistent on promoting transit is regulating
Yeah.
TNCs, regulating Uber and Lyft. That is, I think, the wrong approach. People will stop. I mean, the reason they're doing that is because they're saying that Uber and Lyft are increasing congestion in our cities and so on and so forth. But I think we can trust people to make good, rational decisions. If Uber and Lyft cease to be an efficient form of transportation,
Yeah.
people will make different choices. They don't need to be coerced to make choices based on convenience. We'll do that just fine on our own.
Oh, that's really interesting. Well, all this talk about ride-sharing services, I was asked to maybe wrap up with a story from my experience in work. I go to India quite a bit for work in the last 2 years, and if you ever want to see real traffic, India is pretty wild. You've got every kind of vehicle and most kinds of animals on the road kind of all at once. It's fascinating. Indian drivers are the most adaptive and amazing reflexes I've ever seen, and it's actually pretty fun to be there. But what's really incredible about that is how the competition between Uber and a couple other services like Ola is really kind of amazing, and how the competition between these services is fierce from the airport outwards, and how innovative they are. Every 6 weeks or 2 months ago, they'll have added a new service and are adapting a new way to serve customers. For example, in Bangalore, one of the kind of Silicon Valley of India. Is really remarkable when it makes you think about how adaptive people are and how adaptive the free market it is to get around even things like, for example, really, really bad transport infrastructure like in Bangalore. It makes you think, it makes you admire what kind of individual initiative can do in a situation like that. So
That's great.
We'll wrap it up there. I'll put in a couple of plugs for upcoming Washington Policy Center YP events. We have on Tuesday, the 5th of February, we have Olympia Day. We'll be leading a group down for half day to visit the legislature. And then later in February, on the 28th, we have our mentorship program kickoff. If you're interested in learning more about the mentorship program, please go to our website, washingtonpolicies.org, and click on our YP tab. Please also, reminder to follow us on Instagram and to like us on Facebook. And other than that, Mariya, thanks a lot for your time. This has been really, really interesting and informative about a subject that we all really care about and affects our daily lives very much, which is what Washington Policy Center young professionals are out there to do, is to create a positive impact and a dialogue in our state to increase our quality of life.